Hello, Tesla Cats, this is Tesla-chan, or Lucy if you prefer, and welcome once again back to the garden. Now, like I've said in previous videos, this will not be anything more than a singular series, continuing along with the fanfiction that I've been writing for the creepypasta universe. So viewers' discretion is highly advised. With that said, no images or artwork aside from this one here at the beginning are mine and belong to their respective creators. Any other images used in this video are in the public domain and free to use. I'm not planning on making money off of this series as it stands anyway, so there's no need to worry about that. No need to worry about copyright infringements or other things. With that out of the way, let's continue back into the world of Hunters of Ryzoth and Creepypasta. Hunters of Ryzoth, Pasta Sauce, Chapter 3, Operators, Proxies, and Miscommunications. Slender had watched from a distance for far too long, and his anger had only grown with the fact that he had to keep Kate and Charles hidden away. He had even begun to revert to some of his old ways of killing when he found his prey. He heard a childish-like scream and cry after finishing with the corpse of a young woman. "Slender, help!" cried the voice of a young boy. Slender found himself teleporting in front of the half-skeletal boy, whom he had gained control of many years ago. Slender seemed to freeze, seeing the boy tied up with golden threads. His blank face seemed to devolve, beginning to form dark pits where his eyes would be, and a mouth of black color cut through his paper-white face. "Puppeteer!" he howled in anger, only to earn some laughter. Puppeteer released Charles, causing the young boy to fall, and Slender just barely caught him with his tentacles. "The hell are you doing here?" he called out, trying to locate the ghostly gray entity. Charles looked up at his operator. Taking note of his anger, the proxy shook like a leaf for the first time in many years. "Things have gotten interesting as of late, haven't they?" he asked, finally becoming visible to the tall demon. "A few weeks ago, I didn't even think I'd be here. But now, seeing hunters taking people, your proxies or not, that has to bite." Slender growled inhumanly. "Get to the point!" "Forgive me," Puppeteer said, raising his hands defensively. "I knew playing with your proxy would get your attention, as I wanted to bring a young lady, a new pasta, if you will, to your attention." Slender's expression seemed to relax. Despite the minor annoyance with the puppeteer, he couldn't help but think that operators had to stick together this time. "Why?" he asked, crossing his arms before nodding to Charles, telling him to head back to the house with Kate. "What does a young lady have to do with anything you've brought up?" Charles quietly and quickly scurried away as Puppeteer replied. "This young lady is fairly new to the scene. To be frank, she's even made some friends." Slender sighed as a response, but his avoidance to press him allowed for Puppeteer to continue. And as he did, Slender got a picture painted for him of a young lady with dark hair, and the description of her black hole mask that matched her eyes. Slender recognized that from the eyes of Jeff and even the eyes of Ben more recently. Slender began to shake. "You say this lady saved you?" Puppeteer nodded. He seemed to be confused by the sudden resurgence of rage. Slender calmed himself down and then spoke up once more. "Where is she now?" Puppeteer told him, despite his concern with doing this. "Are you planning on paying her a visit?" Slender just nodded and disappeared before it even crossed Pup's mind to go home and send Cora to warn her in advance. "I feel as though I have made a grave mistake," he muttered on his way off of Slender's turf. "I just hope she'll be able to handle the storm." Tin on wood clicked with each step she made. When she was by the window, she saw her master. "Puppeteer, sir!" she called, saluting the gray-skinned ghost who became her master 10 years ago. "Thank you for waiting for me, Cora," Puppeteer said, a calm smile crossing his face. "Could you get Soldier and meet me in the upper rooms?" Cora blinked, seeing that Puppeteer looked unnerved by something. "Of course, master," she said with a soft-spoken tone. "Did something happen when you visited the Twisted Woods?" Puppeteer seemed to sigh, giving her the cue to leave and just to do as he asked. Cora sped down the hallway to go collect Soldier from his room. All the while, she could only wonder what had transpired between him and the Slender Man. "I could hear you down the hall, Cora," Soldier whined, opening his door. "I swear the only time you don't make a sound is when we're doing a job for Puppeteer." Cora almost laughed at Soldier before speaking. "I'm here because our Puppeteer wants to talk with us in the upper rooms." Soldier froze, looking almost apologetic for his earlier comments. "Right," he said, now speed-walking from his room to the stairwell. "You coming, Tin?" Cora smirked, more casually following the Soldier and her fellow Proxy. Once they got up to Puppeteer's room, attention seemed to cut across the group. Soldier stood up more straight, and Tin was gripping at her fingers, twisting them until Puppeteer spoke. "I have told you about a young Nova, correct?" he asked in a more business-like tone. "The young lady who saved you in the market?" Soldier asked, taking a cautious step forward. "What's wrong? Has she threatened us?" Cora looked at Soldier. Although his concern for their master was their respected trait, sometimes both her and Puppeteer would note that he would jump to conclusions. Puppeteer looked at him with a calm and patient smile before continuing. "At ease, Soldier. It's nothing like that. I went to Slender's forest to speak to him about her, and now it seems to me he's planning to do her harm." Soldier and Tin looked at each other, and then back at him. It seemed odd to the two that a young pasta saving an operator of any kind would enrage anyone at this time. "Do we know why that is?" Cora asked, finding the words no one else could. "I'm afraid not. He didn't tell me why, but he did demand the location of her home," Puppeteer replied, turning his gaze toward the only window in his room. "With that said, hunters haven't been hugely prevalent in this area currently. This means I have jobs for both of you." Both Cora, Tyndall, and Soldier nodded, both of them becoming intensely focused. "Tin, you are to warn Nova and her friends that Slender Man's coming for blood. And Soldier, keep your eyes out and look for other information on hunters and their collections." Tin seemed to be a bit confused by this division of work, but Soldier was the one who ultimately voiced those concerns. "It's not that I don't think Tin can handle herself, sir. But if Slender were to come, wouldn't you want her to have some sort of backup?" Puppeteer looked at Tin, who seemed to nod in agreement with her fellow Proxy. Pup smiled in understanding. He completely understood that Slender may very well keep pace with her, but risking both of them for that wasn't an option at the time. "I know," he said, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "This plan is reckless. That said, even though you are both important, it's because of that risking sending the both of you on the same job is worse. If you finish your work early or she desperately needs your help, I'll change your objective, Soldier. Same goes for you too, Tin." Both of them seemed to be a bit more at ease, and Puppeteer smiled, grateful that his toys were much calmer. As Soldier and Tin prepared for departure, Pup dug around in his belongings. He had hidden some of his purchases from Elk Forest in there, and a set of amulets felt appropriate for his Proxies to carry with them this time. Meanwhile, Soldier had started to talk to Tin, mostly due to the worry about what was going to happen. Do you think things are going to be okay? He asked, pulling an army green hoodie over his military-style uniform. Tin gave a shaky smile, her body making creaky sounds as she answered, "No, soldier, I'm fine, honestly." With the hoodie firmly in its place, he could take a moment to study his fellow Proxy. And dear friend. He wrapped his arms around her, causing the young Proxy to freeze. "Soldier, what are you?" Soldier hummed to silence her. "You're a terrible liar, Tin. You really are." Tin went from stiff to slightly slumped. "Even if I am afraid, worried, whatever, I'm not allowed to deny him, and neither are you." Soldier let go of Tin, allowing her to turn around. Her face was contorted by anxiety, and she looked into his face, then quickly back to the floor. "I'm just worried about failing this," Tin muttered, pulling at the hem of her knee-high red dress. Soldier carefully studied her short build, his gaze between the intricate patterns on the dress, then to her lightly shining pale-colored skin. Her face was framed by a set of thick auburn curls, and her eyes were a glassy pale blue. She looked tired, but that seemed to be normal for them now. He sighed and muttered, "Close your eyes. I want to give you something." Tin looked up at him, her eyes meeting his deep brown-colored ones. "What?" she asked. Before Soldier repeated, "Close your eyes. I want to give you something." Tin closed her eyes. Confusion and worry about this gift made her face scrunch up. Soldier laughed softly. "I'm not pranking you. Relax, Cora." Cora opened her eyes, glaring at him slightly. "Last time you did this," she retorted, "you placed a spider in my hair and it wasn't funny." She stomped, staring at the man in annoyance. She watched the pale-faced man beam, laughing even harder than when she was concerned earlier. "Troy!" she whined, getting him to wipe a tear from his eyes with his jointed, wooden-looking hand. Sorry, he said, catching his breath after a fit of laughter. "I learned my lesson from last time, I promise, Cora. Please, just close your eyes and trust me." Cora groaned, closing her eyes begrudgingly. "You pull anything funny?" Before she could complete her statement, she felt a peck on her forehead. She felt heat rush to her face faster than she could even think, and then heard Troy's voice in her ear. "Use this moment as a badge of courage, and when we both come back, we'll discuss what just happened, okay?" Cora nodded, quickly turning around and pulling on her light brown leather trench coat. Troy stayed silent too, tying his set of combat boots before the two of them waited by the door for Puppeteer. In between awkward silences and Puppeteer giving them the amulets, they both were asking themselves questions. As Tin scurried out the door, Soldier was stopped by Pup briefly. "Yes, sir?" Soldier asked, facing his golden-eyed master. "I give you my blessing on that, you know. Just make sure it's something she wants." Soldier smiled thankfully, heading out the door as Puppeteer watched. Back at Nova's, she had been treating Lou despite his constant attempts to end her life. She would often need E's help to hold him down while they gave him and Ben healing potions. But everything seemed fine on Lou's end. Ben, on the other hand, was not so lucky. Ben had been incredibly silent, still, and everything else, to the point where everyone was worried. People even wondered if the ghost boy was even still alive. Despite the few times Lou had tried to escape, though, he couldn't bring himself to do it anymore. He couldn't leave his fellow pasta, and he wasn't quite sure why. Nova was about to go upstairs to try to figure stuff out again when Lonely walked over. "I know you're busy," he said, placing his face against her leg. "But Silver and E wanted me to tell you that we'll be training outside." Nova leaned down to pet his head, her hand gently stroking him in between the ears. "Thank you for telling me, but you guys don't have to tell me every time, you know." A soft laugh escaped her lips. "Just if you're planning to leave for a while. I know Silver wants to talk to me about something, but he wants to make sure Ben is fine first. So I want to make sure to help him. So I'm sorry if I've been too dismissive." Lonely emanated an Eevee cry before speaking. "It's okay. I'll let them know. And don't overwork yourself, okay?" "I'll try, Lonely," she called after him as he scurried outside. As he left the door, she heard someone walk back up the stairs. She saw a brief moment of boots on the steps, and she sighed. Okay. Time to prepare for another round of questions from Jeff's brother. She took a few steps up the stairs, only to see him waiting for her, right at the top of them. "Getting bolder, are we?" she asked, looking him in the eyes. Lou scowled at her. Then he spoke up. "Between you pinning me down and forcing me to drink God knows what, you suddenly noticed that I've been getting bold?" His voice had a rough edge, but otherwise it was surprisingly smooth. Nova just sighed. "If you hadn't drunk those healing potions, you'd probably be dead right now." Lou seemed to freeze. He was confused by her statement as she squeezed her way past him. When he noticed that she was headed towards the empty room across from hers, he ran to catch up with her. "Healing potions?" he yelled after her. "You have to be nuts!" Nova shook her head in annoyance as she approached a very still and still very quiet Ben. "You live with ghosts and demons all around you, but healing potions, that's where you draw the line, eh, Lou?" Nova's tone was almost bored sounding, and Lou was about to scream at her again when he noticed just how focused she was. It annoyed him that she could shift gears so readily, all while stating that she cared. Ben seemed to glitch out while she tried to wrap wounds that refused to heal. "This shit's getting me nowhere," she muttered in agitation. "No answers from Silas on the collars and no help from Dad or other Asters." Lou just sat down on the bed he had been using and crossed his arms before stating, "If you're here to help, why is he getting worse?" A heat filled the room briefly as Nova's head slowly turned to face the seemingly aloof Lou. "I am doing my damnedest! I am doing everything I know how to do, and I can do. For crying out loud, Lou! You can't tell me you'd do any better!" Those words cut through the silence, and she drew closer to him. He slid back until his back was against the wall. Lou raised his hands defensively when they heard a loud thud followed by demonic cries. Lou looked out the door only to feel dizzy and step back into the room. He was about to suggest who might be out there when an angry voice filled the house. "Nova, get out here or your friends die!" "Stay here with Ben," Nova growled, an unearthly echo filling her voice. "Make sure he stays alive, and if things get bad, get out of here and take Ben with you." Lou was about to argue with her, but Nova was already gone. When he turned back to face Ben, he saw that he was struggling to stay up. A little bit before, Slender seemed to have shown up. Tin Doll had finally made it to the abandoned-looking house that Nova had been said to be staying in. She dreaded the thought that Slender may have been following her since she'd left her master's place. It had taken her about a day, and in a snow-filled forest the trek had been difficult. Although she didn't feel really cold, per se, it felt like the steps that she took would lead to her slipping and sliding every once in a while. She had seen 1 or 2 hunters along the way, and hiding from them had been a challenge. Her heart seemed to leap with excitement when she saw the house with the Pokepastas just standing outside. They were training from how things looked, and when she stumbled into the clearing, he growled at her as she tried to get to her feet. Only then did a young boy from the group begin to walk over. "Who are you?" he called, seeming to have a muted voice laced with the echoes of dying people. Tin stood to her feet and asked a question in return. "Are you guys Lost Silver, E, and Loneliness?" "Who wants to know?" E snapped, earning him a glare from the armless boy. "Do we know you?" Silver asked more defensively. "You may know my master," Tin admitted, feeling slightly embarrassed as she talked. "His name is the Puppeteer." The other Eevee bounded forward, barely getting above the snow each time that he did. "Wait, he's an operator?" Tin smiled, nodding, earning a more eased expression from every member of the group. "Did he want something from us?" he asked, still seeming a bit suspicious of this sudden visit. Lonely seemed to read his worry, as did Silver before Tin could even respond. "I'm so sorry for the sudden visit," Tin said, placing a hand on her chest. "My name is Tyndall. I was sent as a warning. Slenderman is coming under the assumption that you will work for the Hunters. He is intent on death." Tin suddenly froze, pulling the group into a rigid stillness until a voice cut through the silence. "That's enough from you and your master, Tin." The voice seemed to come out of nowhere until Tin was thrown against a nearby tree by a long black tendril. Lonely began to run back inside to retrieve Nova when E was suddenly grabbed. Silver promptly grabbed one of his gifted weapons to fight against the paper-colored demon, when his phantom limbs were suddenly torn off. Each attempt of any of the group to slow down Slender was met with immediate retaliation. Even the abilities Curse and Kill, along with the unknowns trying everything in their power, seemed to do absolutely nothing. It was when Slender had overwhelmed their minds that he spoke again. "None of you had a chance. Nova, get out here or your friends die!" Everything faded to black in their collective vision, as those were the last words that escaped Slender's mouth. When Nova had made her way downstairs and out her front door, she saw Silver lying face first in the dirt. E was on his side bleeding, and Loneliness was laying inches from the porch steps. Nova's eyes twitched, her vision even casting over to a large doll with her head bleeding against a tree near the edge of the clearing. "The fuck is this about, Slender?" she screamed in rage, seeing the faceless demon on the far edge of the clearing. Slender vanished, reappearing directly in front of her, tendrils suddenly wrapping around her in a tight vice-like grip. "That's rich coming from you, Miss Nova," Slender hissed, lifting her up and pulling at her. Nova felt pain pulse throughout her body as his tentacles tightened around her. The waves between crushing squeezes led to minor cracking sounds. Although it felt like an eternity in his grasp, she managed to cover herself in a burning heat. Slender suddenly released her as she began to make her body heat rise. Slender cried out in agony as Nova stood to her feet in pain herself. "Quit whimpering, you bitch," she muttered, looking up at the demon in front of her. "Serves you right, especially when you tried to kill me over something I have nothing to do with." Slender charged at her in anger, causing her to dodge him as quickly as possible. He clipped her a few times before he began to make her vision blur. I've given you too much freedom, Miss Nova. So allow me to take it." Slender laughed, causing her to see things that weren't there. For a little bit, Nova seemed to be able to resist his hallucinations. It only seemed to be a minor inconvenience for her. It was as his rage rose that her movements became more clumsy. Nova struggled to focus, seeing his tendrils in front of her in one place only for them to blindside her in another direction. Nova tried to use her star vision only to have the hallucinations affect that ability too. As she would land an occasional hit, the hallucinations would get worse. She could feel her starting to get exhausted trying to keep up and overcome the hallucinations being forced onto her. It was when he pinned her, trying to punch holes into her body, that Nova wondered if this was it. Despair truly filled her for the first time in a couple of years, and it was odd, but she was fully intent on giving up. Her eyes began to close as pain filled her head and body, when the weight Slender had been placing on her seemed to leave. Her eyes opened, not seeing the paperwhite demon over top of her anymore. She looked around, seeing the scene that she had when leaving her house initially. This time was different, however, as her father stood between her and Slender. Nova carefully stumbled to her feet, starting to check on the others as she did. She heard Slender growl at her father. "This isn't your fight, Orion!" Slender exclaimed. "Even your father would have known this! This is mine!" Her father stood still, anger affecting the brightness of his glow. "You'd be surprised exactly how much of this falls into my domain, Slender. My father would have agreed." "Bullshit, you stupid Asta!" Slender closed in, holding back his urge to kill him, as breaking agreements with Asters would enter him and others into a losing war. "I am well aware of the Hunter situation, Slender," her father argued as calmly as possible, "and young Nova has nothing to do with them. My daughter may be a lot of things, but a Hunter isn't one of them." Slender seemed dumbstruck by this revelation, allowing for Orion to explain further. "I asked her for her help. Exiled or not, she has agreed to the role of emissary, as well as soldier. These hunters wish to revive Ryzoth." Slender was filled with rage again. The idea with a war against him again would be devastating with lacking numbers of creepypastas. However, that didn't excuse Nova's actions against his allies and Proxies. "What does that excuse?" he hissed. "She attacked my allies and Proxies!" Nova spoke up, as she was making sure that E's side wound was patched properly for the time being. "The hunters were controlling them via collars. What was I supposed to do? Let them kill me? It wouldn't have helped anything, so I defended myself. Notice I didn't kill them." Slender and her father looked at her, as her tone was flat and matter-of-factly sounding, as she focused on what she was doing. Slender glared at her disregard for his position. He hated it. She began to walk over to loneliness when she went still. Lonely had stood up as she went rigidly still, and then she booked it inside. Slender was taken from the moment, seeing through the eyes of Ben, as they were briefly staring at a wall before going black suddenly. It seemed like he fell, but Slender didn't know for sure. It was more of a feeling than what he actually saw. "Do you mind if I follow her inside?" he asked Orion begrudgingly. "I don't mind. In fact, she may very well need our help, or mine at least." Orion seemed to blank out Slender from his mind as he followed his daughter, with Slender not far behind him. Slender, still concerned, not trusting Orion or Nova's explanations, as it just seemed too convenient. With Nova Nova being the first one up the stairs, she could already hear someone freaking out. She booked it down the hallway into the room across from her, seeing Lou yell about Ben being on the floor, swearing without filter. Nova ran over to see the ghostly child was drowning. No water, he was just drowning. Nova knelt down, trying to think clearly between her own stress and Lou swearing every other word. Okay, she muttered in frustration. I can try to get him breathing, but this has to be a curse of some sort, and that being the case, I don't have the healing abilities I used to, and I... Her thought process was cut off by a hand on her shoulder. Her father's, to be more specific. I can dispel the curse. His voice was calm, and it seemed to bring down the tension in the room. If you have any healing potions, it should be enough to finish the curse and reverse any and all damage. Nova blinked, giving her father a small smile before mumbling, I'm glad you've changed, Papa. Orion hummed inquisitively as his daughter stood up to grab a potion from the closet in the room, though all he got in return was Nova shaking her head to tell him it wasn't important. Orion somehow could tell that wasn't true, but he continued dispelling the curse, allowing for Ben to breathe. As both the exiled Aster turned pasta and the current head of the Asters worked together, Slender seemed to be in awe. He had seen the powers of the Asters during the wars against Ryzoth years ago, but even watching the diminished Nova in this moment was intriguing. Orion had clearly taken after his father in regards to healing methods, chipping away at the damage slowly so as not to cause anything permanent. Nova, on the other side of this exchange, Nova had to learn to use ingenuity when it came to her losses in power. Healing potions replaced most of her prior healing and self-healing abilities. She used her limitations as a means to invent new ways of survival, as she was now in creepypasta. As Ben began to look better, wounds that were previously not healing healed naturally in front of the group. Nova tried carefully to put him on the bed, only for Slender to do that for her. Her father and Nova looked over at the demon in confusion before he spoke. I'm sorry, he said, sounding oddly embarrassed. To both of you, really. Orion smiled, nodding, while Nova just gave him a pleasant smile. I'm not the only one, though. And neither is his father, Nova admitted kindly. Slender nodded, knowingly, seeming to try not to look at her in the eyes. But Nova seemed to be okay with looking at the old demon. Fear eats at us all, Orion adds. Nova would know. Nova gently elbowed her dad in the side, earning her a laugh as Slender finally looked at her. You forgive me, then? He asked, feeling weird as he did. Nova nodded, only replying, I have a promise to keep, so holding a grudge wouldn't help me anyway. Let's begin anew, eh? Slender nodded as the two of them discussed how to handle their new alliance. Orion slipped away in silence. Days passed between the event with Nova coming and going from both her place and Slender's mansion. She would tell him about Ben's healing process, which was completed 3 days into her trips to and from the mansion, allowing for Ben to return home. She would tell Slender about Lou and his surprising change from wanting to kill her to sticking around. She even told Slender when the Pokepastas left to try to help her find more allies and to help others escape the hunters. She would tell Slender about Elf Forest and Silas, the rules of that market, and Slender would in turn give her hints on where hunters had been spotted to keep her safe on the way back to her house. She and Slender had even worked together to apologize to Puppeteer about what happened to Tin. The healing of her wounds was easy enough, but it felt weird to Nova that she had gone from saving a small group of Pokepastas to speaking with one of the most powerful operators of all. She had gone from no leads or allies to at least a few. Then, one day, about a week after her last meeting with Slender, at the time, she was training with Lou. "I still don't understand you, Nova," Lou said, whipping a knife at her hard. Nova dodged the knife with little effort. After sparring with him for so long now, this felt like a second nature. Ember just lay on the sidelines, sleeping and waiting for her turn. "What don't you understand exactly?" she asked, charging at him full speed. Lou dodged, tripping her to hopefully gain some edge on her this time. You kill other killers. It's your thing, right? So why haven't you targeted us exactly?" Nova rolled away from Lou's foot, threatening to slam down in her face. "I don't see you guys as any different from me for some reason. Maybe a little different based on origin story or whatever, but you all have a reason. Others, not so much. I don't understand it either." As Lou had become more trusting of Nova, he had found himself asking her more about herself, her past. It just interested him. She would often ask him questions in return, but both would eventually stop when they couldn't get the other one to answer anymore. As Nova got ready to attack again, preparing for his next question, the two of them were interrupted by a laugh. Lou nearly tripped over his own feet as Nova skidded to a halt. Both of them turned to see Puppeteer standing on the edge of the clearing. Sorry, you two have a fun way of communicating," Lou hissed at the sudden interruption, getting ready to head back inside when Pup added, "This concerns you too, I'm afraid. You'll want to stay." Lou paused, looking back at Puppeteer with an annoyed look. "What's all this about, Pup?" Nova asked calmly, not sure why he was dropping by after all the prior events. Lou finally fully faced the both of them, annoyance seeming to keep him silent this time. "After what happened with Tin, I understand the question," Puppeteer replied, walking closer to the two of them. "Slender and I have resolved things, so there's no need to worry. This is at least part of why I'm here." "Get on with it," Lou spoke in a numb tone, earning him his first major glare from Nova in a long time. Lou looked away from her, only to earn a quick chuckle from Puppeteer. "Let me get to the point then. Slender has extended an offer to the pastas in the area. He's allowing operators and other pastas to stay at his mansion during this time. As myself, Tin, and Soldier were chased from our home recently, that is where I'm going. My proxies were already sent ahead. But he did want me to extend this invitation to you directly. You don't have much time to make a decision, unfortunately, as I've seen hunters closing in on the area." Nova nodded. Thank you. You'll see us if we catch up." Puppeteer nodded, disappearing into the woods. Nova looked back at Lou, who had now dropped his annoyed demeanor due to this revelation. "Looks like you and I have a decision to make, but I doubt that's going to be hard to decide." The two of them stared at each other briefly before heading inside to quickly talk it over. Thank you again, Tesla Cats, for tuning in to another episode of Hunters of Ryzoth. I hope you've enjoyed the story so far, and I apologize if this chapter comes off as a little bit cringy or too speedy or anything. I am still open to any constructive criticism you may have. With that said, I reiterate that I don't own any of the pictures or anything that is in the video except for my own art, because my Toonsona is my own artwork. Everything else is in the public domain or is owned by their respective creator, whoever drew it. The series will not ever, ever, ever become a series in which I make money off of it. I don't want to do that, and I don't feel like it would be right to take money for someone else's artwork. With that specifically said, I'm still open to any potential ideas you may have for the continuation of this series. I'm already starting chapter 4, and I already kind of have an idea for introducing a couple of other pastas that I have yet to introduce in the series. But that aside, I don't really have anything concrete. I do know the ending to the series is going to be a bit bittersweet, and that's kind of how I view the ending to Godzilla NES, so I kind of am more inspired by how that series ended, and it is in my list of creepypasta stories that I have a playlist for on my YouTube channel. I will link that here at the end too. If you're new and this is the first episode of Hunters of Ryzoth, you have seen the playlist for this series will appear at the very, very end of this video. I've been doing this with every video. If you like my content and want to see more episodes of Hunters of Ryzoth, or are just interested in other content that I do on top of that, please make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this one as the series continues and draws to an eventual close. Obviously, this is not the last episode I will be doing. I don't know when the next episode is going to be recorded, but we'll try to record one for next week. We'll see what happens. I'm not going to keep saying that this is the last episode of Hunters of Ryzoth for now, blah, 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 because who knows if I'll have another chapter written and I decide to record again. So, yeah. If you want a Q&A after this episode for the series, I may take a break from recording episodes to do a Q&A segment for this series. It might help get my thought process flowing a little bit on the series and might help me improve the overall quality of the series. But we'll see what happens. Remember to keep on keeping on, and I'll see you Tesla Cats in the next video of whatever I'm doing. Bye now!